You know, this conference is called the Governor's Trusteeship Conference, and we're happy to have the sponsor of the conference with us now. Matt Bevin was elected the 62nd governor of the Commonwealth of Kentucky in 2015, and he is running for re-election, if you didn't know that. He is a husband, father of 9 children. I saw you guys at the football game the other night, by the way. I should have come down and taken a selfie with you. And he's also a veteran and a successful small business owner. After his military service, Governor Bevin worked for many years in the financial industry and has founded several companies in Kentucky and invested in a number of others. Governor Bevin has also served on many nonprofit boards, including the chairman of the board for the American Red Cross, the Louisville area chapter, and he has permanently endowed several scholarship funds, grants, and centers that provide educational opportunities for young people with limited financial resources. And I will tell you, I've had a chance to work with him deeply over the last year and a half, and his passion toward helping those that are the most underserved is very, very clear. So thank you for that, Governor. We'd like to welcome you to our stage to give us a few words. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning. As is often the case with these, it's the person that will follow me that will bring the greatest degree of enlightenment and perspective and thought, which is good, because as we've often said, and as you know, iron sharpens iron. There have been a lot of people, both in elected office and in academia, who have delivered exactly on that, and the gentleman that will follow me in the state immediately to our south has done that, and I'll get to that in a moment. But I want to just touch on a few things. First of all, I just want to thank you for being here. Those of you represent a whole variety of facets, some of you in academia itself, university presidents, deans, but I'll tell you, there are many of you who are simply serving as trustees, and I say simply, it is a critical role. It really is. Your willingness to do it. Some of you have taken this on while wearing a lot of other hats. Some of you have done it after having retired from something and thinking your life would take a slightly more relaxed course. But I just thank you for doing it. It's critical. The level of judgment, the level of governance that you bring to the equation is critical. We are at a juncture. You've had conversations yesterday, I guess it was, perhaps last night, with John Chilton. Certainly for those of you regional universities in particular, you understand that there's big decisions to be made as it relates to your pension obligations and how you may choose to proceed in the years ahead. I won't go into that in great detail. I may just touch on it briefly. But I know that the decisions that are before you are not going to be easy ones, and I'm grateful to you. I was just sharing with Governor Haslam, even this morning, having nothing to do with academia, things that were on my plate were things that, frankly, I would have not typically thought I would have to think about. It involves literally life and death situations for people that are in the care of our state. And this is just one little example of things on my plate. You all have your own variations on the exact same theme. You have things that come into your lives, personally and professionally, that may or may not be directly related to what you're doing here today. So thank you for juggling all those things. Thank you for handling those things and still pouring into ensuring that the next generation of Kentuckians and people who are entrusted to us from other places for their higher education are going to be prepared for the 21st century. For the 21st century workforce, let's be honest, quite specifically, that is the purpose of post-secondary education. It's interesting, I've alluded to this in the past, but it's true enough. Thomas Jefferson, who was the first really in this nation to be a strong proponent and a vocal proponent of using the limited tax dollars that were brought in from the people for the furtherance of education, said that the purpose in doing this was to create what he called virtuous citizens. And virtuous citizens are not easily defined. It doesn't fit in a neat little box. But a virtuous citizen is somebody who's an integral part of society, integrated into the fabric of society, somebody who contributes and gives back somebody who's well-rounded. And well-rounded, we'll talk about that, isn't just simply being scientifically focused or artistically focused, but somebody who is all the above. A virtuous citizen is somebody who is part of the contributing society in a way that is undeniable. To work is a virtue. To be a contributing part of society is a virtue. That is what he meant by virtuous citizen. We have no less mandate today in our K through 12, in our post-secondary world. You know this, you've seen the statistics of the millions of jobs that have been created since the downturn of 10 years ago. 90+% of them are jobs that require some type of post-secondary education. Almost gone in their entirety are the days when you could get a job with no post-secondary skills or training whatsoever. We don't have that luxury anymore. We don't. So it's imperative that we find ways to get young people on these paths early on. You'll hear again after me about a state that has done this, pioneered on this front, under the leadership of the man that will speak. There's things that we've done here trying to piggyback off that, learn from that, to understand ways in which we might be able to do things a little bit differently, especially given some of the limited resources that we have. One of the things that I do want to mention to you, a couple of things come to mind. I don't have things written out as to specifically what points that I would make to you, but there's several things that have come to mind as I've had conversations even this morning and then in recent days. What is the role of these institutions that you all govern and that you all run? It really is to prepare people. But how is it that we do it? What is our responsibility? How much can we assume on ourselves? How much should be done prior to people even entering institutions of higher learning? This is part of why at the state level we've started to think very intentionally about things like dual credit training and what types of even financial literacy courses and things we're preparing young people for. And one of the things that you hear often in the workplace and that now increasingly is moving down into academia, and for good reason, used to come out of the home and scout troops and Sunday school classes and in sports teams, and seemingly less so than it once did, or what are referred to as soft skills or life skills, the ability to collaborate, be respectful, have civil discourse. Increasingly now, we have people that are young adults that are coming into your care that you're being asked to somehow infuse things into them that were once sort of innate, seemingly, or at least were groomed prior to them landing on a college campus. I don't think necessarily that we've been helped by the anonymity of things like this. You know, these devices, tremendously handy on the one hand, but have allowed us to go down certain paths that may or may not be as advantageous as we would hope. I wonder sometimes when I see how prevalent now that computer screens are at the secondary level and even in the primary level and up, if we're really helping ourselves, if we're really helping society, if our kids are showing up unprepared, have we really helped them by making them technically savvy? Are they really more academically inclined? I don't know. These are questions we should ask ourselves. It does concern me that even in our state still, fully a third, based on a variety of metrics, of the young people who graduate from high school in our state are not prepared for post-secondary life, either the workforce or preparation to enter into your institutions. We've got to do better than this. We do. We've started. Progress is being made. One of the things that concerns me, and I'll throw this out to Aaron, to the folks at CPE, but frankly to all of us, we are the only state in the United States that has a lower threshold for what is considered college ready on the ACT than does the ACT itself. The only state. That's not an outlier that we want to be. Every state in the country uses what the ACT considers to be the minimum standard for college preparedness. And we in Kentucky are the only state that says, no, we're going to lower that standard and consider that to be acceptable. That should concern you. It should. It should concern all of us. At the bare minimum, we want to be at least as good as average. At least. Our goal, our standard should not be something that's less than everyone else in the country. And so I throw that out to you as a challenge, to you at CPE that sets this standard, to those of you that are the recipients of folks who have attained or not attained that standard. I would encourage all of you to collaboratively think, is that really where we want to be? I would submit to you that it's not. There's other things too. There's places where we do things well. There's things we do better than average. But in those places where we're not, how can we find others that we can learn from? I talked about the fact that, to make a truly virtuous citizen is comprised of a lot of different inputs. I've made clear from the beginning, and I've spoken to you in the past on a couple of occasions, my vision for our state. It is a simple one. I'll reiterate it again, even though many of you have heard it. The short version of it is that I want this state to excel in a particular area that we already excel in, but I would like us to take it to another level. If I asked each of you, by giving you a note card, 2 questions, to write 1 word on the front and 1 word on the back based on the 2 questions, 90+% of you would write the same word on one side, and we'd get 10 or 15 or 20 different answers on the other. The 1 question on the one side is if you were to engineer and manufacture something from beginning to end, from the conception of an idea to the actual production of the product, beginning to end, a pharmaceutical product, a metal stamped product, a petrochemical product, anything, a medical device. If you had to do it in a single country in Europe, where would you think to do that? 90+% of you would write Germany on the one side of that card. Not because it's the only place. In fact, you could do it in any number of places. But without question, it's the one that comes to people's mind. It's the one that's most, I don't know, well regarded, frankly, not just in this country, not just in Europe, but globally. I've asked that question of people in Asia. I've asked that in rooms in Seoul, in Tokyo, in Delhi, cities around this country and in our state. Every time when people comment on the name, Germany is what comes to mind. If I were to ask you to turn that card over and write on the other side, if you had to engineer and manufacture something, anything, from beginning to end in a single state in the United States, where would you think to start? In this room, especially if these were anonymous, you'd get 15, 20 different answers easily. Some of you might say Kentucky, some would say Tennessee, some would say Texas, Indiana, Michigan, Ohio, North Carolina, California, Massachusetts, any number of good answers, each one of them equally as defensible as the next. It's not as intuitive, it's not as instinctive in our minds as Germany is. This tells us 2 things. Number 1, nobody owns it from a perception and maybe even a reality standpoint the way Germany owns it. And if nobody owns it, what else does it tell us? It's available for ownership. Simple as that. If it's available for ownership, I want Kentucky to own it. There's states nearby that would like to own that as well and may beg to differ with my thoughts on this. But I would say this, it's quite available for ownership. We're already well on our way to doing it, already producing some of the most advanced aviation and aerospace-related components in the world, second only to Washington State, where Boeing is in terms of exported products into that field, per capita producing more automobiles, resins and petrochemicals and things of this sort that are being in our top 4 or 5 exports, things we're already doing well, medical devices, pharmaceuticals. People don't realize even the things we're already doing. We're doing these things, but we don't own it. I want Kentucky to own it. As simple as that. That is my vision. It's not a complicated one. So then how do we accomplish that? How do we accomplish it? Because as the world's pendulum swings back to North America and to the United States, and to the center of that being this little region that we're talking about, the amount of capital being repatriated, the amount of opportunity returning to North America, this is a very, very real opportunity for us. Trillions of dollars are moving, looking for a stable place to get a return on that investment, but it can only be deployed when there is confidence. Capital goes where it is welcome. Capital goes where there is consistency, reliability. Capital goes where there's going to be a return. I want this state to be the state that people feel confident in. We've had $21 billion in private capital invested in Kentucky in the last 3.5 years. That's a lot. We've never had a 10-year period where we've had so much private capital invested here. But those are just seeds in the ground, and we need more of them in order for us to be what we're capable of being. The question then is, what is each of our roles at every level? This is post-secondary that we're talking about, but it's also a function of what we're feeding to you. It's why we have focused as we have since I was elected on dual credit training. And historically, what dual credit has been is pursuit of typically a 4-year and sometimes a 2-year degree. But now, as you're aware, it allows young people to be able to pursue certifications and licenses. So if somebody wanted to become a certified welder, they'd be able to use dual credit training for that, among other things. This is good. I don't want us to be limited in how we have people pursue education. I've shared with some of you a book that I read some years ago. I didn't read it when I was young. I read it as a young adult. But I've always remembered it. I've possibly even mentioned it before in speaking with you. It was written by a man named Louis L'Amour, famous Western writer. But it was his autobiography. It was published posthumously. It was nearly complete when he died. He was a guy that left home at 15, never graduated from high school, published over 100 best-selling books, never graduated from high school. Clearly, an education doesn't come simply inside of 4 walls in a traditional sense. The name of this book was somewhat appropriately, The Education of a Wandering Man. And in it, I remember a passage, even though it's been some time since I read it, that talked about the nature of education itself is not something that you get. You don't just go to school and get it. That to assume that it is gotten, and once gotten, you're done getting it because you have it, is to miss the whole point. That the very nature of education is that it is an ongoing and continuous process. It is a life process and a life skill. And this is all of our jobs at every turn, within our homes, within our responsibilities in academia, to keep that spigot wide open, to keep that on, to keep that process of learning and of continuous learning and the love of learning alive and well and thriving and healthy. This is what we want. This is what we want for all of our young people. So how do we do that? We've developed certain things in the last few years, and you're aware of this, and you're seeing a change in the caliber of people and the focus of people that are on your campuses, especially those in the KCTC system, some of our technical schools in particular. By having dual credit, yes, but then additionally these work-ready scholarships. It was modeled in some measure off of the Tennessee Promise scholarships, but more focused in that saying, listen, rather than just anything that someone might pursue, let's focus on those areas where we have 100 and some odd thousand open jobs, 5 key areas: IT, healthcare, construction trades, advanced manufacturing, logistics. These are areas where there are 60 sub-disciplines, hundreds of sub-disciplines, pursuits that people could follow. And in these areas, if somebody wants to pursue up to 30 graduate hours, essentially a couple years worth of effort, that the state will pay last dollar in every instance. They can apply for financial aid. The state will pay last dollar so that an individual can pursue something in these areas. And it doesn't matter your age. You could be 18, you could be 48. I was at the state fair this year. I met a father and a son who are both pursuing their electrical technician certification together in the same class. I thought that was awesome. And they were excited by that. They were appreciative of that. These people will sit in the classrooms of every single institution that's represented here today. How do we meet these people where they are? How do we take them to that next level? How do we help them become virtuous citizens? I had a conversation with someone, I'm not sure that he's in the room right now, but somebody among your ranks. We talked about whether you can teach grit. There's a book that was published recently about grit. I've not read it. This person suggested it. I look forward to reading it. But I'm not sure that you can. We had a conversation about whether or not, stretching that analogy to a student being a diamond, say. The pressure creates diamonds. I'm not sure that, frankly, the time someone has on any of our campuses creates the kind of pressure that will form a diamond. But I think our responsibility is to polish the diamonds that come to us Some will come already shiny. Some will come in remarkably rough form. Some will perhaps not even be recognized, look like a little chunk of carbon that would be questionable as to its productivity or value. Our responsibility is to figure out how to best polish them, how to make every facet glimmer exactly as and where it should, reflecting not only the inputs, but then shedding light outward. These are the things that we have to wrestle with. And I'm grateful to you for taking this challenge. I know it's not easy. You've had post-secondary budgets in this state cut for many, many, many years, or at best go sideways. That's not a good trajectory. It's not by any stretch. But you know for a fact the financial strains that we have. You know the pressures you have on your own pension systems and the cost for your university's budgets as a result of that. These are tough times. The times that try men's souls and the times that try men's budgets. But I'm telling you what, this is the beginning, I believe, of a turning point. Our state is never before been in the national spotlight like it is now. Economically, from an idea standpoint, the cutting of red tape, criminal justice reform, adoption and foster care reform, things that affect each of us more than we know. These are things that are happening now at a time when we, as those that are in these seats, have extra responsibility. Outcomes-based funding, it was resisted by many in this room, perhaps not some of you that are newer, but some of you that have been around a while. No one likes the idea of being measured to a metric, held to a standard that has historically not been there. People like the idea, and I'm a former active duty military guy. We used to just get budgets based on however much you had the last year, and it was sort of a use it or lose it mentality. We've used the same a bit in higher education through the years. And nobody likes the idea necessarily of bringing in a situation where you're going to be held to account. You're already starting to see changes based on the focus of those degrees that you all are conferring on people. You're going to continue to see more changes, and there'll be winners and losers, for lack of a better term, financially. I challenge each of you in your institutions to figure out how you can make sure you're winners, because it is possible that every institution can attain every dollar that it had and then some. We did have a small surplus last year. We're projected to have a small surplus again this year. By small, I mean so small that it's almost negligible. It won't even begin to replace dollars that we would hope that it would for post-secondary purposes. I was speaking with Aaron about the fact that there'll still be requests of us in this next budget session. And I said, listen, you get 100% of what you don't ask for, so you should ask for a lot. You should. And where it's possible, we will have those dollars made available to you. Nothing would make me happier, because the two things, and with this I'll wind up, the two things that differentiate us from where we are relative to where we would like to be, and frankly, where we are relative to states and others around us with whom we compete for jobs and job creators. Two things, infrastructure and education. There's other things, yes. The two most critical are infrastructure and education. That's it. That's not lost on me. It's not lost on our legislature. You say, well, then how come we're not spending more money on those things? Because we don't have it. 15% of our state budget already is spent on pensions for people that are already retired. 15% for a single-digit number of our citizens. And it's projected in the next few years to be 20, 25, 30%. And with every new $1 billion or even hundreds of millions on the way to being billions of dollars that are spent on that, it's monies that would have gone to these two things and others that's not happening. We need to move to more of a consumption-based economy. We need to replicate states like Tennessee. These are things that are going to happen. They're happening slowly. Ours is not an easy job, those in this room. It's not simple. Some of you are trustees and on the board of schools that are struggling financially. To you in particular, I'm grateful. You have hard decisions to make. But we'll do these things together. The final thing I'll say is this. I alluded to it at the outset. I want to reiterate to you, please do understand that while my focus is on these work-ready scholarships, and while these all seem to be somewhat technical, and while my vision talks about engineering and manufacturing things, on the engineering front, if people are not creative, if they don't understand the arts in the art of the possible, that which has never been done, if they're not able to think outside the box, no innovation or ingenuity ever occurs. I'm somebody who holds a Bachelor of Arts in East Asian Studies. I got this at a time when everyone thought Japan was taking over the world. I figured if they are, I want to know what they're talking about. Turns out they didn't. But I tell you what, I don't regret that. If I were a teacher myself, I would probably teach history. I love history. I mean, these are the things, my natural inclinations are literature, history, arts. That's what I personally love. But I also have a responsibility to realize, how do we prepare people for the ability to feed themselves and be productive, virtuous citizens? This is the balance. We cannot create STEM robots. We can't allow people to be just free-range chickens and thinkers with an ability to feed themselves. How do we meld those together? That is our responsibility. How do we do it within the context of the budgets that we have? How do we do it to be competitive? The final thing I'll say is this, and it's something I've challenged you all with in the past, and I'll leave you with this thought. Within each of your institutions, there are certain things that you do particularly well. The days and age of the universities being able to be everything to everyone are not as prevalent as they once were. Let's put it that way. So I would challenge each of you, and especially you boards, to think about what are the 2, 3, 5 things you can do not only as well as anybody, but better than anyone, not just within Kentucky, but within this region, and perhaps even within the entire country, where you can be the destination for X, Y, or Z. That is what is going to separate people in the future from their possibility. It just is. That is literally going to be the difference. Not everybody can deliver the very same degrees and expect to stay competitive, just expect to stay viable financially. So what are the 2, 3, 5 things that you can do better than anyone? How can you spend more of your resources on those things, excelling above all others in this state, in this region, to be able to make that case to prospective students and to their parents, to guidance counselors, where it becomes as intuitive as it was to us to think about Germany, when people think, hey, if I want to get a degree in X or Y or Z, what school in this state or region? Well, obviously, I'd think of such and such university. If your university does not have the ability to be perceived in that way, as being the best at something, it's going to be a long row to hoe, and the row will probably end sooner than we would want. Public education is changing at every level. The pace of life, of technology is changing our lives in dramatic ways. It's our responsibility to keep pace with that. I truly am grateful to you. Please know that I'm going to do everything I can to find ways in which we can bring dollars to you. Because without it, if we don't innovate, if we don't have the ability to fund opportunity, I don't mean just pure dollars, I mean with a good return on that investment, where the output justifies the input of the dollars, then we will not be able to compete. We will not be able to succeed relative to other states. We are in competition, friendly competition with good people. But I'll tell you this, we look at other states around us, and it gives me great pleasure now to introduce to you a man who I have modeled a lot of my thinking on this topic by looking at what he's done. He's a man who served his state as governor for 8 years, a guy who comes from the private sector. He's been very successful on a number of fronts. But he too understood years ago that Tennessee, which had some of the same socioeconomic and demographic challenges and opportunities that we have, needed to chart a different path, needed to look at the 21st century and education in a different way. Introduced something that has now been replicated to varying degrees by people like us and many others around the country, but was fairly novel, innovative at its time, the Tennessee Promise Scholarship. Please help me to welcome our neighbor to the south, the former governor of Tennessee, Bill has them.